From fabulous Las Vegas, Nevada, this is Pod Therapy. Real people, real problems, real therapists. Do you want some free advice? Visit us at podtherapy.net or tweet to us at podtherapyguys to submit your questions to the show. We're recording episode 2, which can mean only one thing. The feedback we got from episode 1 wasn't bad enough to make us stop.
Try harder if you want us to quit. Send that hate mail.
And now, broadcasting from Level 9 Studios, that guy's Dr. Jim Jobin. I'm Nick Tangman. It's time for some Pod Therapy. So, President Trump over the weekend let us know via Twitter that he is a stable genius, which is
a very stable genius.
Right, which is a quality we all look for in a president.
I'd like that.
We've never had one that had to publicly affirm it.
But I appreciate the candor. He's letting us know.
Now, very early on, when we first started recording this podcast, a long, long time ago.
In the early days of 2018, as I remember. Yeah,
we made the commitment that we were not going to become political simply because there's a lot of people already doing that. That are probably doing a better job than we are. No one's going to tune into therapy guys to get
their political
advice.
Feedback.
However, this one kind of started to fall into our wheelhouse a little bit.
That's right.
When it starts getting into some mental health.
Let the record show, Nick, we did not go looking for him. He came over to our side of the street and said, let's talk about my mental health. Thank you, Mr. President. We would welcome that conversation.
Yeah, so since the president has publicly opened up a discussion about his own mental health, we've been getting some tweets. We have been getting some feedback and some questions from people we know, just asking, what's your opinion on all this? Would you like to weigh in? So we decided to break our silence for a few thoughts about the situation. So here's the thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was making a mental health diagnosis. What do you feel the public needs to know about that?
I think the public probably needs to start with, it's not as easy as you guys think. I'm seeing a lot of hashtag stable genius on Twitter, and all sorts of folks have offered really, really bold clinical opinions about President Trump. So, Nick, I think we're hearing a lot of folks that are, coming out of the woodwork and saying, here's what I think he's got. Here's the language that I'm going to use. But maybe we should start with teaching the listener exactly what we have to do in order to make one of these diagnoses.
Right. And there's a lot of mental health professionals, psychiatrists, psychologists that are public figures that have podcasts, TV shows. And for the most part, I'm not seeing a whole lot of them stepping out on the ledge to make any kind of public statement or public diagnosis, which I think says a lot.
Oh, not just that. That's the number one question I've heard. I mean, I think the two questions I've heard is, one, what do you guys think is going on? And two, why aren't you guys telling us what you think is going on? Why is Dr. Drew, Dr. Phil, why aren't any of you guys offering us a diagnosis? And you're right. There's a silence from our side of the street. And I think that's what's befuddling a lot of people. Why aren't we doing that?
For there to be a diagnosis, there has to be a thorough evaluation, which is something that needs to be done in person. This is not something that can be done just by sound bites that we see, by tweets, or by small clips on TV.
Or via press conference.
Exactly.
Or Twitter. Can't do that. We don't diagnose people at 140 characters at a time.
Right. And I think one of the big things that I wanted to kind of illustrate with this is that there's a big difference between having traits of a mental health diagnosis versus having a mental health diagnosis. Because that's something that we see a lot with self-diagnosing.
Right.
The example I always like to use when I hear people say, oh, I'm OCD. I love having a clean apartment. I'm very OCD.
I'm OCD. Why? I do my dishes.
Part of that may be just the way we speak. Right. I think for the most part, people don't actually believe that they have OCD.
Right.
But there are occasional instances in which that does happen where people will make a diagnosis. And really what they're saying is that they have some traits
symptoms
of a disorder.
Right.
But there's a lot of criteria that one has to meet to get a mental health diagnosis?
Yeah, it's a whole page of like checklist items that you have to kind of do some exhaustive work in even to do that. I think that we have a phenomenon now where people go on the internet and they type in like the 3 things that they noticed they had today, and then WebMD comes back and it's like, yeah, you're definitely dying, or it's like OCD, or this is a very severe thing, or you have borderline personality disorder, and we see that all the time, and not just self-diagnosing, but diagnosing other people. There's a lot of I think effort going on where people are like, yeah, my boyfriend is schizophrenic. Like, wow. Holy cow, that's severe. Well, why did you conclude that? Well, he doesn't seem to catch my emotions.
Right. So. Or so-and-so is a sociopath.
He's a sociopath. Oh, my gosh.
Right.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the harm in doing that?
Gosh, it's a lot of harm, guys. I mean, so I get that. I'm glad that people are fascinated with mental health, and that's part of why we get to do this podcast, is a lot of people are starting to dabble in this language and wanting to know how it works. I guess the caution I want to send to folks is like, this is a medical discipline, and if you saw a rash on your friend's arm, I don't think you'd walk up and tell them what that is. I think you'd say, I'm concerned. I think you should go get that checked out by the experts. And that's, I think, the exact right thing to do, but we got to be really careful how we speculate on this stuff, right? Because there's a lot of work that goes into diagnosis. I mean, Nick, whenever you diagnose somebody, how quick can you do that? You turn that around in about 3 minutes, you take one look at them and say, yep, you're definitely a sociopath.
No, absolutely not. Yeah, this is something that takes some time. Right?
Yeah.
I think to kind of clarify that message, the issue that we are kind of talking about and kind of the stance that we're taking in this isn't necessarily rushing to his defense and saying, no, I don't think this. It's more of an issue of separating the discussion of capability of performing one's duties from making a mental health diagnosis.
Yes. Competence.
You can have, I think those are, competence, that is a fair discussion. I think that's a good discussion to have.
Very fair.
For me, my perspective, the concern that I have with throwing out mental health disorders is that if that's done inappropriately, it adds to the stigma of mental health. And I'm concerned that the individuals who do have mental health issues or mental health diagnoses are less likely to seek treatment.
That's right.
Because of the stigma that gets thrown around. That would be my biggst concern.
Absolutely.
With all this.
That's my big concern. My thing is this. I don't want to see anybody weaponize medical terminology to hurt somebody or to make somebody else appear less than. That's just not what those words are for, right? And so, like, if you're genuinely concerned, I think that you point at that rash and you say, buddy, I think you should go get that checked out. But we don't, like, call that person names, and, like, start saying, you got this rash, you must have a problem. Like, that's probably the wrong use of these words. And I think there is a huge cost. If people hear this, they're going to say, well, I didn't vote for Trump, so I'm not going to go see a therapist because people think he should see a therapist, and I'm not like him. And it's like, whoa, guys, therapists are not referees in politics. We have one job. We're helpers.
Right.
We don't vote, in the office. We're there to just find out what's going on and see if we can help you.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I see a lot of questions that I get from people that I know that are not involved in therapy. And you'll see this even on Reddit threads of people who just are not comfortable seeking therapy or seeking any type of health, mental health help.
Yes.
Because of the stigma, and people will get stuck in their disorder and it starts to affect their lives.
Yes.
There is a solution, but to take the steps to get to that solution, they feel like they're going to be looked down upon.
So let me ask you this, Nick. So I think we're both in agreement that when we're using mental health words, when we're talking about this, and again, for the listener, the president came to our side of the street. He's the one that opened up a public dialogue about his own mental stability. Fine. So we're having that conversation. And you can hear us saying, hey, we don't like to diagnose from far away. It takes a long time for us to get to know somebody and really come to a clear conclusion. So let's all be really thoughtful about what it takes to actually arrive at conclusions. However, having said that, I think this is an important moment in history because In the last 5 to 10 years, we've all collectively as Americans realized that health is bigger than just physical health, right? Mental health matters. It's becoming part of the core of how we see healthcare. Anybody who wants to be the next president of the United States goes and gets a physical evaluation by a medical doctor of their choosing, and they release that to the public when they're ready, because the status of your blood pressure is our business if you're going to have your hand next to the nuclear trigger, right? I think it's time for us to include a mental health examination as part of that. And that's not, us weaponizing mental health. It's just part of the normal business of a medical evaluation. And if you don't like our opinion, go get a second opinion, right? And then release that to the public on your terms. We're not going to do that for you. There's actually a congressman, Representative Brendan Boyle from Pennsylvania, actually put out the Stable Genius Act, which essentially requires, it's really called that. It's called the Stable Genius Act, and it actually requires anybody who files for the office of president to get a full medical and mental health evaluation, and for that information to be released to the public. Now, I think he's trying to be pretty spiteful by calling the act.
It's a little passive-aggressive.
It's a little on the nose. But I actually agree with the spirit of the idea,
right.
even though I think he's kind of being a jerk in how he's doing it.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, as we move forward with, seeing all of these laws being passed with mental health parity and how we are treating mental health the same as we are treating physical illness, that to me makes sense.
I think it does. And, I want to take a second, Nick, because you and I are avid podcast listeners. That's why we got into this. I want to celebrate some folks that I think handled this issue right. I'm a big fan of a show called Pod Save America with the guys Jon Favreau, John Lovett, and Tommy Vitor, and they had an awesome opportunity to really fumble this and deal with the stable genius thing by weaponizing mental illness words. They didn't do it. So I'm going to give them huge props on that. I also want to celebrate NPR Politics, which is a great show. They actually did a 10-minute treatment where they surveyed therapists and explained in clinical language why they refuse to diagnose somebody, why that is unethical to do to a public figure. And I just appreciate that they're adding to this dialogue. Anytime people are handling it right, I want to celebrate it. I want to highlight that and say, let's do more of that.
Absolutely.
So, Nick, we got our first big question today, and I want to start this one off. I'm going to read it. This question is titled, I'm worried about my boyfriend's mental state, and I'm not sure what to do. And it's submitted by username Unprepared Adult. She writes, I am currently dating my first boyfriend ever. He's 26, is genuinely one of the kindest, gentlest people I've ever met. I'm very, very happy in our relationship, and even though I'm a total perfectionist, there's pretty much nothing I would change. That being said, I'm currently worried about my boyfriend's mental state, and I'm not really sure what to do. Basically, he is very loving. He's always doing lovely things for me, and saying lovely things for me. When we met, I was not at all confident about myself or the way I looked, and he's changed that dramatically. All this might sound amazing, and truly I appreciate everything he does. But lately, I've also been worried that he does these things because he feels he has to, and he feels unworthy to be with me in some way. This is especially obvious on the rare occasions that we fight. Recently, for example, we were watching TV, and he snapped at me for chewing too loudly. I stood up in a huff and I left the room. And he followed me and started crying. Then I started crying and saying that I was upset because he had made me feel disgusting for the way I chew. It was such a silly argument. And I was more than ready to forgive and forget. But then my boyfriend started saying that he deserved to die for hurting me, and that he was a piece of expletive, and all of these other horrible things about himself. He was shaking and crying, and I had to hold him and rub his back and tell him I loved him and forgave him repeatedly before he could even begin to calm down. He kept saying how effed up he is and how he doesn't want to affect me, even though I told him that I want nothing more than to help him and that I'm completely content in our relationship. While it's obviously a good thing that my boyfriend doesn't enjoy hurting my feelings, it also scares me that he's quite so terrified of hurting me. I mean, it seems inevitable in a relationship with two imperfect people. We're going to hurt each other from time to time, and we need to be able to forgive each other and ourselves. If I had upset him in the same way, I'd feel guilty for sure, but I don't think I'd feel as if I deserved to die. My boyfriend is a wonderful, handsome, smart, kind man, and it horrifies me that he wouldn't realize that, or that he'd somehow feel inferior to me. I don't really know what to do. Does this sound like a serious problem, or am I just completely overthinking it? I've suggested to my boyfriend that he go to a doctor or a therapist, but he was adamant that he won't, and I don't want to pressure him. He's also stubborn, and I don't think it will work. Are there other ways I can support him? I don't know. I feel kind of scared, like he's giving me way more power over his mental well-being than I can handle. Ugh, please help. Jeez,
Okay.
Nick, that's a big one.
That's a big
one. So when you hear that, that's a good story. There's a lot to that. What do you take away from that?
Yeah.